So last September, I was on a vision quest with the Lakota tribe in Colorado, and I was struck by lightning. Yeah, and if you're not doing your work, then you get struck by lightning, so just a word of caution to everybody. And one of the things that I experienced was my third near-death experience, and one of the places that I've gone in that space is up to this grid of light. And I'm going to show you a picture of that. And on that grid of light, it looks like the flower of life. You guys are all familiar with that symbol, yes? If you're not, you'll see it. And each one of those little bars that connect the other bars in the sacred geometry of energy field of this universe and galaxies beyond, and our bodies and our cells and our brains and all of our organs, that bar of light represents each one of us, or you represent life, or the light of each one of those bars, is what I was shown. And that flower goes around our whole world. And the places where the light is dimmer, flickering or out, is a place where someone's very ill, has given up, feels blocked, feels like they don't have what they need to show their gifts, feels like they're not good enough, they want to be invisible, whatever it is, you know what I'm talking about. And then the place where it's bright is where somebody is actually showing up, and they're doing their work, and they're putting themselves out there, and they're being vulnerable and powerful in their vulnerability. We have to do that because that grid gets weak if we don't. It's not even optional. So it just shows just how important life is, each one of our lives, because we're interconnected and we form that strength. And in my meditation one day, I asked myself this question. Autoimmune, which was dancing across my third eye space, I was thinking, that means I'm attacking myself. Why do I want to die? Because in that time, I didn't want to. So I started going backwards in my lifetime, and I found this little kid version of myself who was being sexually abused at the age of 10 by the vice principal in my elementary school. And I thought, of course, I wanted to die then. I felt completely unsafe. Adults can't be trusted. No one's looking out for me. I'm not worth protecting. All of these beliefs that we create as children when we don't have a good, well-attuned caregiver right on our shoulder to help us navigate our trials. Who among us, including me as a mother of 4, can always be with our kids or have a caregiver with us 24/7? It's not possible, right? So when we're little kids, we make stuff up because our brains aren't fully developed till we're 26. So this is what's happening, to a lot of kids, as we know, around the world right now. And I was introduced to this idea of panchakoshas. So I started thinking about where this old trauma was probably stored. So in Ayurveda, there's this understanding that we have 5 different layers. They're called panchakoshas, 5 sheaths. And the first one, your Annamaya kosha, is your physical body. It's where your genetics are, your cells, your nervous system, your organs. It's your physical self that you're supposed to feed and water and take for walks. Then you have an energy self, Pranamaya kosha. And in that space, you have 720,000 little places where your nerves cross. They're called nadis, also acupuncture points. And old trauma is stored there in your nervous system. And then you have your emotional body, your mental body, and the place that you then connect to the divine through. Anandamaya kosha is your portal that goes to what you could call, Carl Jung called it, our collective unconsciousness. It's your spiritual self. It's the place where you guys all want to get all the time. We all want to, right? When you say I want to be a clearer channel, it means you want that door to be sort of like the doggy door. You can go in and out anytime you want, right? And there's no barrier. So we get access to that in that same way that the doggy door works if we're not toxic in those other layers. So that becomes our work, right? How to not be toxic in the other layers. Easy. Okay. I wanted to hear what people thought about this word karma. I feel like it's a charged word, and people will automatically drop it into a bucket that they've figured out it means for themselves. So I thought, I'm just curious what people think. And some people thought it's like a punitive thing, right? And then others thought the way that I think about it, which is it's the law of physics. It's for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. It's just a consequence to an action. You eat a chocolate cake in its entirety. The next day, you probably put on some pounds and maybe have some joint pain. That's not bad karma and it's not good karma. It's just the consequences to that action. There's no shame in it until you put it there, right? You don't exercise, then you break down in your body, your musculoskeletal system, your muscles. It's not bad, it's not good, but it has its own consequences. And we only put shame in there ourselves. The scale never goes at you and tells you how bad you are, right? We do that. The thing that sets your karma into action so that you can't bring it back again is emotion. Emotion sets your karma in motion. When I learned this, it was such an amazing breakthrough. Think about this. If trauma or stressful events get stored in that pranamaya kosha, that place where all those 720,000 little nadis are crossed, your nervous system holds it. Then when you have an emotion, you're setting that up again, over and over and over again. You lay down the tracks for how that works when you're very young. So that when someone comes along in adulthood and pushes a button that you've already set up. So karma is basically a setup for a future upset. And emotions are what set it in motion. So this is what gets in our way of being good channels and getting the doggy door going in Anandamaya Kosha. Because we get trapped in these old spaces. 720,000 of them to be precise. It's a lot. We're starting to think about flexibility and resilience. The more fully developed you are, the more resilient you are. If you have something that's rigid in your body, it's because there's something that's rigid in your mind. It just reflects it, right? So the more developmentally aware you are, the more resilient and flexible you are, the less of that will be going on in your body, in your physical structure, and in your cells. So if you think about karma then, people always think that they don't have any control over that. So you think about, okay, so what was set up before I got here with my parents, and now what can I do to maybe put the train on a different track? Well, it's about what? Emotions. I can learn to deal with my stress in a different way. Now, stress is talked about all the time. In fact, people start to tune it out because it's so often talked about. When I'm talking about stress, I'm actually talking about trauma. And I'm talking about trauma from a perspective that everybody's had it. So we can think about this capital T trauma or lowercase t trauma. Capital T trauma would be the stuff that's like sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological, emotional, right? Lowercase t trauma is going to be what any of you that have healing practices in here hear every single day, because I do, and that is, I'm so overwhelmed. You give them a self-care practice and they start to cry. Anyone had that experience? Has anyone ever been given a self-care practice and started to cry? Yeah, me too. So because we're overscheduled, we're overburdened, a lot of women are like trying to bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and look hot at the same time, and they just are too overscheduled. And we're keeping our children that way too. So when you think about it in that way, then you say everybody has trauma, because MRI imaging, PET scan images of brains are showing us that the very same brain damage that's happening in the prefrontal cortex for someone that's had PTSD, which is reversible, is the same thing that's happening for people that are self-reporting personal stress that's day in and day out. Isn't that alarming? Brain damage, prefrontal cortex shrinkage, And the right side of the amygdala, increased amount of gray matter. Blah! So it's really incumbent on us to work on this, okay? So then that makes our challenges and our blockages and the places that we're not moving in and out of the doggy door so smoothly, the good stuff. It's the stuff that we go to help us develop. It's our growth edge. It's Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. It's the call to action. Inside of the cell, there are these 3 energies. And so you can think about this. When I say cell now, you know I mean soul and I mean universe too. Inside of the cell are these 3 energies. Ojus is life force. I call it O-juice. And it's H3O2. Your cells actually don't hydrate with H2O. They hydrate with H3O2. So your body has to do that conversion. What converts it? Being barefooted on the earth. Getting buried in the sand like you did when you were children. Being out in the sunshine. Far infrared sauna does it really well. Turmeric, ginger, all the things we already know are so good for us and anti-inflammatory. Now we know why. They actually help us convert our water properly so that our cells can actually get hydrated and get the nutrients in and the toxic out. Isn't that cool? So inside the cell, we've got this ojus. And then we also have prana, which is the communication within the cell and between the cells. And we have tejas. Okay, so tejas is the fire. It's the metabolic activity. So if there's a breakdown in any of these 3, then if we don't have cellular intelligence, that's where we get autoimmune disease and cancer. Okay, and so if we think about dosha-specific intelligence, what it looks like to be balanced and imbalanced, a Vata person will be fearful, they're going to have dryness of all kinds. Pitta people will be judgmental and inflamed, and Kapha people are going to be heavy and lethargic and wanting to hoard everything. Okay? I'm a Pitta Kapha. They want to hoard their friends, they want to hoard their time, they want to hoard all of the stuff that they have around them. More. So Agni is fire and Ama is toxicity. We need the fire to burn up the toxicity. Agni is the god of fire in Sanskrit, but it also just means your metabolism too. Should be here centered as your digestive fire. If it gets out of control and you have a prairie fire that's going throughout your body, you have inflammation. If you have none, you have a white coating on your tongue and mucus in your stools. IBS. Okay? So that's an interruption of the ability for you to metabolize your nutrients and get rid of your waste products. Isn't that amazing they knew this all that long ago? So what you could say autoimmunity is, and I focus on autoimmunity because autoimmunity is the pandemic of today. Like, so many people, 10 to 1 women are getting autoimmune disease diagnosed, and so many people don't know they have it, and it's been brewing for about 20 years before they're finally diagnosed. So with the doshas, most people that have an autoimmune disease are Pitta. It's the type A, competitive, perfectionist person. There's not a person with autoimmune disease that is not a perfectionist. And they never want to look at that. They don't believe they're perfectionists because if you really knew how imperfect I was, you would never call me a perfectionist. Right? They have a bar in their heads about what should be, and they're very far away from that. Okay. A lot of judgmental stuff going on inside of a Pitta head until they're aware of it and they can become more resilient. So remember how I said emotions set your karma in motion? Well, here's a chart about emotions and the doshas. Pitta is going to be very inflammatory emotions. It's going to be strong, it's going to be anger, envy, jealousy, frustration, any synonym that goes along with that, annoyed, irritable. Kapha is going to be more around attachment. Kapha holds on to mucus, holds on to weight, and holds on to friends and hurts from the past. Vata is going to be lighter, quicker moving. Anxious. Vata people tend to be very anxious when they're imbalanced. Any one of those is going to set off any of that nervous system cortisol release that can create inflammation. So, but if we repress our emotions, then that just makes our digestive fire go out. And it makes our changes, are those functional changes that are the disease progressive states. And each organ has an attachment to an emotion. So the ACEs study, has anyone heard of the ACEs study in here? Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Adverse Childhood Experiences Study brings all of this ancient stuff I've been talking about into modern day. 1995, Kaiser Permanente had a weight loss clinic. And it was really successful. They were getting really good results with this clinic. But a lot of people were dropping out, particularly women, before they finished. Luckily, the clinic director was curious and started asking questions and inviting people to tell him what was going on. He found out that all of them had been sexually abused. Not everyone in the weight loss clinic, but all the ones that dropped out. He was very distressed, and in fact, the story goes that he started crying. Was at a conference, met with somebody from the Centers for Disease Control. They started talking about it and decided to do this big study. So between 1995 and 1997, they did the ACEs study on over 17,000 people. And what they did is they asked about 10 different adverse childhood experiences. It's by no means exhaustive, but it is sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional, psychological, whether or not you witnessed your mother get abused, whether you had a parent incarcerated, whether you had a parent addicted to a drug or alcohol, or loss of some kind, so neglect. Over 2/3 of the people that were studied of that over 17,000 cohort had an ACE score of at least 1. That's a lot. So what they started seeing, and studies are still being done off of the ACE study today, findings, it's kind of like the Framingham study for heart, still being pulled apart, the data, to find different little jewels. But what they found is that people with an ACE score of 1 or more, and the higher the ACE score, the more exponential this is. The more at risk they are for every chronic disease that we have in our society today, the more at risk they are for addiction of their own, sedentary lifestyle, calling in sick to work, dropping out of school early, having poor relationship quality, promiscuity in sexual relationships, so more STIs, all of it. And the higher the ACE score, the lower your life expectancy. So again, comes back to this causes brain damage. And remember I told you about the 5 kinds of mind. Well, they call them the 5 kleshas that these cause: ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life in a way that's not free so that you can channel your best self. It's related to all of these stressors that we go through. So what Ayurveda says is the autoimmune disease is undigested anger. Now, after you've heard all that, doesn't that make so much sense? Undigested anger. How elegant is that? So I did a study before I'd heard of the ACEs study, because I was getting a lot of people in my office asking me for hormone replacement therapy. And I do bioidentical hormone replacement, but I was getting a lot of people. You gave this to my friend, my daughter, my mother, and she feels fantastic and I want some of that. And I would start asking questions like, so why do you think you have a hormone imbalance? And then they would start telling me. And sometimes it had to do with libido. That's when I went back to school and got a PhD in sexology, because I was looking at this. And I thought, what is the deal with women and low libido? And when I start asking them really simple questions, they're answering with odd answers. So in other words, when I say, when's the last time you had a libido level you were happy with? And they say never. And I say, do you think estrogen's gonna help that? And then they start crying, because they're looking at me as their last hope. It must be hormonal. Or if I say, when is the last time you looked at your spouse and you liked him? And then they start crying and say, well, he had an affair 5 years ago and I've forgiven him, but I don't really feel like having sex with him. Well, progesterone doesn't help that, right? So I started realizing that we had this unspoken thing happening just underneath the surface in our society. And that hormones, because of Suzanne Summers probably, were the answer to everything. And I thought, well, that's not really accurate. And so I conducted a study called the HURT study, and it stands for Healing Unresolved Trauma. And it was a small pilot study of 90 people, women from the Pacific Northwest. And so then that means they were all white, and they were mostly heterosexual, and they were mostly really well educated and in socioeconomic status that was fairly equal. So not indicative of the rest of the world at all. But what I found is that, yeah, if they had a hurt when they were younger and their spouse pushed that button, they didn't have a sexual desire level. Well, as a woman, that made a lot of sense to me, but guess what? In the medical literature, nothing said that. Nothing. We're still looking for the big pill, the pink Viagra. Can I just get clear about this? Viagra's for erections. We don't have those. So I just don't get it. So anyway, well, that's another talk. So, so what I found is, when you're young, remember, your brain's not fully developed till you're 26. And you go through a traumatic experience. And that can be, I remember doing therapy for a woman who her big trauma was she never got new clothes. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, and she was so traumatized. And her belief was that she wasn't important because she always got hand-me-downs. So trauma is trauma for whoever it is. The bar is set where they are. And if what you get is you have this event, it gets locked into your body as a feeling and a sensation, like that linear thing I showed you. And then if you see up on that first gold loop up there, you go into fight or flight or freeze. After that, you're going to create a belief and a meaning. So in my case, I'm sitting in my 5th grade classroom, and the intercom in the corner of the classroom crackles to life. Pledge of Allegiance every day. I go into fight or flight, because occasionally it was calling me to the principal's office. And I would get white-knuckled every time the static came on that thing. It was Pavlovian. And I would just crack my pencil and stare at my teacher and beg him not to send me down there. So the belief that I made up, I told you, I'm not safe. And I was right. Our little child minds actually make up a belief that fits where we're at. I wasn't safe. But if I carry that forward into adulthood, it's not true, and it's self-limiting, and it means I can't be a good channel. I can't reach my spiritual potential if I'm constantly feeling unsafe, right? So every time the radio comes on, I'm just kidding, I don't go into fight or flight every time the radio comes on. So when that happens then, the belief is that the behavior I created was I have to be perfect. Because the vice principal is telling me this was my fault because I was a bad kid. So then that means I'm going to be perfect. Well, is that belief system, is that a usable one in adulthood? Okay, remember I said perfectionism is what people with autoimmune disease have. How many of you have a perfectionism thing in your head at some point in your life? Yeah. You know what? It's so interesting because we as parents create that in our kids. Do it this way. Oh, you're so good, you brought home an A. There's no way around it. Of course we're going to praise them for what they've done well. Our job then is to say, this doesn't mean that I don't love you when you don't bring home an A. It's the follow through, right? Yeah. So what happens is on that yellow loop, we create that with our undeveloped brains. And then when we get confronted in the hero's journey with the next call to action, we have a choice. And that's where the model bifurcates. You either stay in your maladaptive memory loop process and you act out in the ways you did when you were a kid. And today I witnessed that in my office. This woman came completely unglued and was screaming in the waiting room. We had to call the police. And she just came unglued. It was like a two-year-old temper tantrum. So sometimes we're not skillful with the ways we handle our stressful events. That's that left side of the model. We stay in that space. That's when we get sick. The right side of that is when we're willing to self-confront. Willingness being the most important word in the English language. Willingness to take this and make it into, polish a turd and make it into a diamond. Have I heard that before? Is that real?
That's real.
Yeah, okay. That's what you're doing, right? You're making it into the lesson that you're supposed to learn. And when you do that, you're doing that self-confrontation. If you can't do it on your own, you're getting help. You're borrowing a brain from someone that's really good at pattern recognition. And it has to be trauma release therapy. It has to be like EMDR, clinical hypnotherapy, brain spotting, pardon?
Tremoring.
Yes, things that will actually take that amygdala and link it to the prefrontal cortex, not talk therapy. That's where I'm going with that, just not talk therapy, because that just is your ability to cement your karma by telling your story over and over again, right? Okay. In that process, you reach a place of forgiveness and radical acceptance. That creates health. So autoimmunity or any chronic thing is a puzzle, and it includes your genetics for sure. It includes your digestive health, as we've talked about, Ama and Agni. It includes your environmental exposures to different things, as well as your trauma and your stress. So I use something called the Freedom Framework, which is a lot of self-confrontation. People that have worked with me sometimes don't like it. So the digestive system, those little cells that pull apart, cortisol is what breaks this down, as well as antibiotics and steroid use, street drugs, prescription medications, oral contraceptives, environmental toxins, but stress is a biggie. Because if you are a zebra being chased by a lion, again, this comes back to that libido question about whether or not it's about hormones or not, then that zebra knows it's not safe to stop and have sex, right? So if someone's overwhelmed all the time and chronically stressed and can't do one more self-care thing, they also are not going to have any kind of libido. Because the body's very wise, it knows. I'm not keeping you alive very well, I'm not going to keep someone else alive, so cut that off, right? It also knows it's not safe to stop and go to the bathroom. So constipation. So all of those things happen with that chronic overwhelming stress. So has anyone in here had a chronic illness before? Okay, a lot of people find their way to this kind of space from that. It's the call to action, right? And there is a separation. If I know that when I stopped eating sugar and stopped drinking and didn't go to bars anymore, I felt fairly isolated from my community, right, that I was with at that time. So there's a separation where you feel different from everybody. And if you accept that call, then you find a mentor. If you don't accept that call, then this will keep happening. The isolation, the loneliness, and the illness. So then you find your mentor who gives you the learning you're supposed to have, and then you get this opportunity to go in your cave and integrate it, and then come out. And this is where people get really mad. First they say, I've done everything you told me to do. But when you come out of the cave, now life has this beautiful opportunity to give you places where you can find mastery of your new skill, right? And people get mad about that because they think they've done it. It's one and done. It's mastery time. Then you emerge from that space having mastered your new skill, and you're reincarnated, you're rebirthed, right? You're in your next level of development. And then you return back to your community, and now you serve as an oracle. And everyone in here is an oracle. Yes? Yeah. And then here's the other place people get really mad. It happens again. I thought I already did this, right? I remember having a patient that had cancer 3 times. The first time she came in and she said, what is this teaching me, Dr. Keesha? What is this supposed to, like, I know you're going to tell me there's a lesson here. And so we went through everything, and, you know, I went through it, and she said, oh, that makes sense. And then she started integrating. Her cancer went away. She got better. Then a year later, she got cancer again. And this time she had to have a mastectomy. And she said, what was the lesson in this? And then we went through it, and she learned it, and she was amazing. She started a circle of women and became a mentor. She became the oracle and really helped a lot of people. And then the third time she got cancer, she came in and she said, what was the lesson? And I said, it's time to go home. And she said, oh. And she died the most peaceful death. I worked hospice for years. I love hospice, and I love helping people move to the next level. And she had me do ceremony with her community of women that she created and help transition her into the next level. And it was so beautiful because she knew, oh, it's time to go home. There's a better place than here.